At your age, this kind of stress can quietly kill you. That was the sentence Eleanor heard from her doctor. Not dramatic, not emotional, just calm, clinical, certain. Eleanor was 73 years old, sitting fully dressed on the edge of an exam table, her purse still on her lap like she might need to leave at any second. Her blood pressure was higher than it had ever been. Her sleep had been broken for months. Her headaches had become routine. Yet every test came back normal. No stroke, no tumor, no clear medical explanation. The doctor leaned back and asked a question Eleanor wasn't expecting. "Who do you spend most of your time with?" Earlier that same morning, Eleanor had been awake before sunrise. The house was silent. No television, no radio, just the sound of the coffee maker clicking off by itself. She stood there longer than necessary, staring at the mug in her hands, feeling tired in a way sleep never fixed. 3 years ago, Eleanor did something most people her age are too afraid to do. She didn't announce it. She didn't argue. She didn't explain herself. She quietly stepped away. Today, I'm going to tell you how Eleanor cut ties with a group of friends she had known for years. Was it the best decision she ever made for her health, or the beginning of a loneliness that would follow her for the rest of her life? But before we go any further, pause for just 1 second and give this video a like. And if you want your health, both physical and mental, to get better as the years go on, make sure you subscribe. Now, let's begin the story. Since Eleanor stepped back, her neighbors have whispered. Her sister asked if she was okay. Someone from church stopped calling, and something unexpected happened. Her blood pressure slowly dropped. She began sleeping through the night. Her doctor used the word stable for the first time in years. People assumed it was medication, or luck, or age finally being kinder. But Eleanor knew better, because what she walked away from wasn't a place. It was people. People she had known for decades. People she once called family. People who never yelled, never insulted her, never did anything obviously wrong. And yet, every time she left them, she felt exhausted, drained, smaller than before. Most people believe loneliness is the greatest danger of old age. But Eleanor was beginning to understand something far more uncomfortable. Sometimes it's not being alone that breaks you. It's staying. And the real reason she did it wasn't anger. It was survival. After Eleanor stepped away, people assumed something dramatic must have happened. A fight, a betrayal, a falling out. The truth was far less exciting and far more familiar. For years, Eleanor belonged to a small circle of friends she met regularly. Same faces, same schedule, same routine, Sunday brunch once a week, a senior group meeting twice a month, church events sprinkled in between. Nothing unusual, nothing toxic on the surface. These were people she had known for decades, women who had watched each other age, who remembered each other's children when they were young, who shared recipes, birthdays, and stories they had told 100 times before. From the outside, it looked like friendship. Inside the room, it felt different. There was Linda, who always arrived first and always started the conversation the same way, by listing everything that was wrong: her knees, her back, her doctor, her neighbors, her adult children who never listened. Every sentence was a complaint, delivered with exhaustion and expectation, as if the room existed to absorb her frustration. Then there was Carol. Quiet at first, polite, but sharp when she spoke. Carol had opinions about everything: how people dressed, how they raised their kids, how they spent their money. She didn't insult anyone directly. She didn't have to. Her judgments came wrapped in smiles. And then there was Nancy. Nancy loved comparisons. Whose grandchild got into which school? Whose retirement account was doing better? Who traveled more? Who aged better? She spoke softly, but her stories always landed the same way, reminding everyone where they stood. None of these women were cruel. That's what made it so confusing. They remembered Eleanor's birthday. They sent cards. They asked her to show up. But every time Eleanor sat at that table, she felt herself disappear. She listened. She nodded. She smiled when expected. She became the reliable one, the steady one, the woman who was always doing fine. No one asked follow-up questions. No one paused long enough to notice when she went quiet. No one asked how she was. Not really. And Eleanor made it easy for them. She never complained. She never corrected anyone. She never said, "I'm not okay." She filled the role assigned to her without realizing it. The listener, the emotional buffer, the one who absorbed everyone else's weight. After brunch, she would drive home in silence. Not angry, not upset, just exhausted. The kind of exhaustion that doesn't come from doing too much, but from being too little. She would sit in her car for a moment before going inside, hands still on the steering wheel, wondering why a simple meal left her feeling like she had run a marathon. At night, she replayed conversations she barely participated in. She wondered if she should have said more, if she should have defended herself, if she was imagining things. And then she told herself what most people tell themselves in long relationships. It's just how they are. They don't mean anything by it. We've known each other too long to change now. Time became the excuse. History became the justification. And Eleanor stayed. Not because it felt good, but because leaving felt wrong. What Eleanor didn't realize then was this. Friendship doesn't become unhealthy all at once. It erodes. It erodes when one person is always giving and never receiving. When listening becomes obligation instead of choice. When showing up costs more energy than it brings back. No one ever yelled at Eleanor. No one insulted her outright. No one crossed a line that could be clearly named, but every gathering ended the same way. Eleanor left feeling smaller than when she arrived. She carried everyone else's stories home with her, their worries, their resentments, their comparisons, and slowly, quietly, they settled into her body. She thought this was normal. She thought this was aging. She thought feeling tired around people meant something was wrong with her. What she didn't yet understand was that the people you keep closest to you don't have to hurt you loudly to harm you deeply. Sometimes they just drain you, and Eleanor was running out of energy. Eleanor didn't go home angry. That's what made it harder to understand. After each gathering, she drove back the same way she always had. Same streets, same traffic lights, same driveway. She unlocked the door, set her keys down, and moved through the house without turning anything on. No music, no television, just silence. She told herself she was tired. That was the easiest explanation. But the tiredness sat in her chest, not her body. It felt heavy, pressed down, like something unspoken had followed her home and refused to leave. At night, she replayed moments she hadn't noticed while they were happening. A sentence she started and never finished. A story she tried to tell, interrupted halfway through. A comment she made, met with a quick nod before the conversation moved on without her. Nothing dramatic, nothing you could point to and say, "That's the problem," just small cuts. Repeated, over years. Eleanor began to notice a pattern. When Linda complained, everyone listened. When Nancy shared her updates, the room leaned in. When Carol offered an opinion, it was acknowledged. When Eleanor spoke, the conversation kept moving. Sometimes someone interrupted her without realizing it. Sometimes someone answered their phone. Sometimes someone simply didn't hear her, or pretended not to. Eleanor started adjusting herself. She talked less. She waited for pauses that never came. She laughed at stories she'd heard dozens of times before, and when she did speak, she kept it light. "I'm fine. Nothing new." "Oh, you know how it is." Those words became armor. Inside, questions began to form, quietly at first. Am I being too sensitive? Is this just what happens at this age? Maybe I expect too much. She remembered being younger when conversations felt alive, when people leaned forward, when she felt seen. Now she felt like background noise, and the worst part was that no one noticed the change, not when she stopped sharing, not when she went quiet, not when she smiled less. Because Eleanor had always been the steady one, the one who didn't need attention, the one who didn't cause problems, the one who made things easier for everyone else. Over time, that role became a trap. She began leaving gatherings with a familiar routine. She'd sit in her car for a moment longer than necessary. She'd take a deep breath she didn't know she was holding. She'd feel relief mixed with guilt, relief that it was over, guilt for feeling that way at all. At home, she felt emotionally bruised, even though nothing bad had happened. She slept, but didn't feel rested. She ate, but had no appetite. She watched shows, but couldn't follow the plot. Her mind kept circling the same thought. Why does being around people I care about make me feel worse? But she never said it out loud, because admitting that would mean questioning relationships she had invested years in, and that felt dangerous. So Eleanor did what many people her age do. She minimized her feelings. She told herself it was normal to feel invisible sometimes. She told herself everyone was tired. She told herself this was just part of getting older. What she didn't know was that psychologists have studied this exact pattern. According to research published by the American Psychological Association, long-term emotional neglect, even subtle, can lead to increased stress, anxiety, and physical symptoms in older adults. Not from conflict, from dismissal, from being unseen, from carrying emotional weight that never gets set down. Eleanor didn't know the statistics. She only knew how she felt, and she felt like she was shrinking, slowly, quietly. She hadn't lost her voice overnight. She had given it away, one interrupted sentence at a time. And without realizing it, Eleanor had begun to believe that this was simply the price of staying connected. But something inside her was starting to resist that idea, not loudly, not yet, just enough to make her uncomfortable, just enough to make her tired in a way she couldn't explain, just enough to prepare her for what came next. The first thing Eleanor lost was sleep. Not all at once, not dramatically. She would fall asleep just fine, then wake up at 2 or 3 in the morning, staring at the ceiling, her heart racing for no clear reason. No nightmare, no noise, just awake. At first she blamed coffee, then age, then the weather. She tried going to bed earlier. She tried reading instead of watching TV. She tried every small adjustment people recommend when sleep begins to slip away. Nothing worked. Then came the fatigue, not the kind that disappears after a nap, the kind that settles into your bones. Simple errands felt heavier. Conversations required effort. Even decisions, what to eat, where to go, felt exhausting. And then there was her blood pressure. It had always been a little high. That's what doctors said for years. Manageable, nothing urgent, until it wasn't. One afternoon, Eleanor felt dizzy while standing in line at the pharmacy. Another time, her vision blurred while driving home from brunch. She began carrying water everywhere, just in case. She stopped taking the stairs. Still, she told herself it was nothing serious. Because that's what people her age do. They normalize discomfort. They downplay symptoms. They adjust instead of questioning. Eventually, her doctor called her in for another appointment. The numbers were higher than before. Not alarming, but persistent. The doctor looked at the chart, then at Eleanor, then back at the chart. He asked about her diet, her activity level, her medications. Eleanor answered carefully, honestly. Everything checked out. Then he paused and asked something that didn't sound medical at all. Is there anything stressing you out? Eleanor smiled. No, she said quickly. The answer came automatically, too automatically. The doctor nodded but didn't rush to the next question. He waited. Eleanor shifted in her chair. She thought about the word stress. She thought about what counted as stress. She wasn't caring for a sick spouse. She wasn't dealing with financial trouble. She wasn't grieving a recent loss. So she said it again. No, nothing unusual. The doctor didn't argue. He simply said something Eleanor wouldn't forget. At your age, long-term emotional stress doesn't always feel dramatic. It shows up quietly, through sleep, through blood pressure, through fatigue. Eleanor nodded politely. The appointment ended. She walked to her car the same way she always did. And then, without warning, she started crying, not sobbing, not falling apart, just tears, steady and uncontrollable. She sat there gripping the steering wheel, confused and embarrassed, wiping her face with the back of her hand, looking around to make sure no one was watching. Nothing had happened, no bad news, no diagnosis, no confrontation. So why couldn't she stop? The realization scared her, not the tears themselves, but the fact that she hadn't known they were there. She sat in silence until the feeling passed, then drove home as if nothing had happened. But something had changed. Her body had reacted before her mind was ready to admit the truth. That night, Eleanor lay awake again. She thought about the doctor's question. Is there anything stressing you out? She replayed it the way people replay words that land too close to something they've been avoiding. Her chest felt tight, not painful, just uncomfortable. She wondered how long she had been carrying tension without calling it stress, how long she had ignored the signals because they didn't come with a clear explanation. According to studies from the National Institute on Aging, chronic emotional strain, especially from long-term relationships, can increase the risk of high blood pressure, sleep disorders, and fatigue in older adults, not because the body is weak, but because it's been patient for too long. Eleanor didn't know the research. She only knew that her body was no longer cooperating with the story she kept telling herself. The story where everything was fine. The story where she was just tired. The story where nothing needed to change. For the first time, she allowed a different thought to surface. What if this isn't about age at all? The idea unsettled her, because if it wasn't age, then it meant something else had to be addressed, and Eleanor wasn't sure she was ready for that yet, but her body had already made the decision to speak, and it wasn't going to be ignored much longer. The moment didn't arrive with a breakdown. There was no argument, no final straw, no dramatic goodbye. It happened on an ordinary afternoon. Eleanor was home alone, no plans, no brunch, no meeting to get ready for. She sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea that had gone cold without her noticing. The phone rested face up beside her. Silent. She didn't check it, because for the first time in a long while, there was nothing to respond to. No reminders, no group messages, no familiar obligation pulling her out the door. At first, the quiet felt uncomfortable, too open, too empty. She noticed the absence before she noticed the relief. This was usually the hour she'd be driving somewhere, rehearsing polite responses, preparing herself to listen, telling herself to be patient. Instead, she stayed where she was. And nothing happened. No one called to ask where she was. No one texted to check in. No one noticed her absence at all. That realization landed heavier than she expected. Not painful, just clarifying. She stood up and moved through the house slowly, not looking for anything in particular. She straightened a chair, rinsed her mug, looked out the window and then away again. Her chest still felt hollow, but underneath that feeling, something else began to surface. Lightness. Not happiness. Not joy. Just space. She sat back down and let herself stay there. No distractions. No explanations. And that's when the question came, not as a thought she forced, but one that arrived fully formed. If being around people makes me feel worse, why am I afraid to be alone? The question unsettled her, because she already knew the answer. She had been afraid of what stepping back might mean, afraid of being judged, afraid of being labeled difficult, afraid of confirming the quiet fear so many older people carry, that once you stop showing up, you disappear. But sitting there, alone, Eleanor didn't feel invisible. She felt present. Her breathing slowed. Her shoulders dropped without her realizing they'd been tense. The tightness she'd grown used to wasn't gone, but it wasn't pressing as hard. She stayed home that day, and the next time there was an invitation, she didn't rush to answer. She didn't explain. She didn't apologize. She didn't invent an excuse. She simply waited. Another invitation came, then another. She responded politely, briefly, without committing. I'm not sure yet. I won't be able to make it. Maybe another time. No announcement, no statement, no confrontation, just distance. And something surprising happened. The world didn't collapse. No one demanded answers. No one showed up at her door. No one asked how she was really doing. Some people seemed confused. Some sounded disappointed. Most adjusted quickly. Eleanor watched all of this from a quiet place inside herself. She noticed how her body responded. On the day she stayed home, she slept better. Her headaches softened. Her energy didn't disappear by mid-afternoon. She also noticed the guilt. It came and went. A tight feeling in her stomach. A voice reminding her how long these friendships had lasted, how much history she was stepping away from. But guilt didn't feel the way it used to. It no longer outweighed the relief. Eleanor began to understand something important. She wasn't cutting people off. She was giving herself room to breathe, and for the first time, she didn't try to explain that to anyone. Not to justify it, not to soften it, not to make it easier for others to accept. She simply allowed herself to step back, quietly, respectfully, without permission. It wasn't courage, it was honesty. Honesty about how she felt when she stayed. Honesty about how she felt when she didn't. She didn't know where this decision would lead. She only knew that for the first time in a long while, her body wasn't fighting her, and that felt like something worth listening to. The first few weeks were harder than Eleanor expected, not because she missed anyone in particular, but because her calendar was suddenly empty. No brunch circled in pen, no reminders taped to the fridge, no familiar rhythm telling her where she needed to be. The quiet that once felt relieving now felt sharp. She woke up on Sundays and reached for her phone out of habit, then remembered there was nothing to check, no plans to confirm, no messages waiting. Loneliness didn't arrive dramatically. It showed up as long afternoons, as meals eaten earlier than usual, as time stretching without structure. Eleanor noticed it most in the evenings. That was when conversations used to echo in her head. Complaints, stories, comparisons. Now there was only silence, and she had to learn how to sit with it. Some days she questioned herself. Maybe this was a mistake. Maybe this is what people warned me about. She didn't run back. Instead, she paid attention. She noticed that even on lonely days, her body felt calmer. She noticed that the tightness in her chest no longer followed her from room to room. She noticed that exhaustion didn't hit her the way it used to. Loneliness, she realized, was uncomfortable, but it wasn't draining. So she began to fill her time, not to stay busy, but to stay grounded. She started walking in the mornings, not power walking, not counting steps, just walking. Around the neighborhood, past houses she'd driven by for years but never really seen. She walked slowly, stopping when she felt like it, turning back when she didn't. No one set the pace. At first it felt strange not having someone beside her. No conversation to manage, no stories to absorb. Then it felt freeing. She began going to the library once a week, not because she needed books, but because the space felt neutral, quiet, unassuming. She could sit without performing. She could leave without explanation. Sometimes she read. Sometimes she just sat. No one expected anything from her. Eventually, Eleanor signed up for a small watercolor class at the community center. She hesitated before registering. She'd never been artistic. She didn't know anyone there. She worried it might feel awkward. But the class was small, gentle, no pressure. People came, painted, talked a little, and went home. No one overshared. No one competed. No one demanded closeness. Eleanor liked that. She also noticed something important. She didn't feel the urge to explain herself anymore. When she missed a class, no one questioned it. When she showed up quiet, no one filled the silence for her. When she left early, no one took it personally. Connection without obligation. That was new. One afternoon, a woman named Ruth sat beside her during class. They exchanged a few words about paint colors, about how fast the water spread across the paper. Nothing personal. The next week, they nodded at each other again. Eventually, they shared a coffee after class. No history, no expectations, no labels, just company. Eleanor didn't call Ruth a best friend. She didn't need to. They met when it felt right. They skipped weeks without explanation. They talked about small things, and when they didn't talk, it was still comfortable. That was the difference. Eleanor wasn't adding people to replace the ones she stepped away from. She was removing the weight she'd been carrying, the constant listening, the emotional labor, the pressure to be present even when she had nothing left to give. Her life didn't suddenly become full. It became manageable. Some days were still quiet. Some days were still lonely. But none of them left her feeling smaller. According to research from Harvard's study of adult development, it's not the number of relationships that predicts well-being later in life. It's the quality. Eleanor didn't know the study. She just knew how her body felt now. Lighter, steadier, less on edge. She wasn't chasing connection anymore. She was choosing it, carefully, sparingly, and without guilt. And for the first time, Eleanor understood that peace doesn't come from surrounding yourself with people. It comes from letting go of what drains you. Today, Eleanor's life looks smaller from the outside. She doesn't have a full calendar. She doesn't belong to a tight group anymore. Her phone doesn't buzz the way it used to. But inside, everything feels different. She wakes up without dread. She moves through her days without bracing herself. Her body no longer carries tension it can't explain. Eleanor still has people in her life, just not many. And for the first time, that doesn't scare her. She understands now that peace isn't loud. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't come with applause or approval. It arrives quietly, when you finally stop forcing yourself to stay where you no longer fit. Looking back, Eleanor doesn't hate her old friends. She doesn't replay arguments. She doesn't list wrongs. She doesn't wish things had ended differently, because nothing ended in the way people expect. The connection simply stopped being mutual. And that led her to the first lesson she learned. Not early, but in time. History does not equal healthy. Just because a relationship has lasted a long time doesn't mean it deserves to last forever. Time alone doesn't make something good. Longevity doesn't guarantee care. Shared memories don't cancel out present exhaustion. Staying loyal to the past can quietly cost you your future. The second lesson came with age and clarity. Old age is not about holding on. It's about choosing peace. When you're young, you tolerate discomfort. You adapt. You tell yourself things will change. But later in life, energy becomes precious. There is less time to recover, less room for emotional noise, less patience for relationships that take more than they give. Eleanor didn't walk away because she was bitter. She walked away because her body asked her to stop ignoring the truth. And finally, the lesson that surprised her most. Alone does not mean lonely. Loneliness is feeling unseen while surrounded by people. Solitude is being with yourself, without fear. Eleanor discovered that sitting alone in a quiet room felt far better than sitting at a table where she felt invisible. She learned that peace doesn't require constant company. It requires honesty. Some days are still quiet. Some evenings stretch longer than she'd like. But none of them leave her drained. None of them make her question her worth. None of them cost her health. In a world where millions of older adults struggle silently with stress, anxiety, and chronic fatigue, Eleanor's story isn't rare. What's rare is listening to yourself before the damage becomes irreversible. Doctors can prescribe medication, therapists can offer tools, but no one can choose your boundaries for you. That choice belongs to you. Eleanor didn't make her decision to be brave. She made it to survive. And in doing so, she gained something far more valuable than approval. She gained herself. She didn't lose her friends. She lost the weight she'd been carrying for years. So let me ask you this. How many people in your life bring you peace? And how many quietly take it away? Leave a comment below and be honest with yourself. I read every single one. And if this story felt meaningful to you, please subscribe and support our goal of reaching 10,000 subscribers this year. Next time, I'll be sharing 5 things you should never reveal to anyone, no matter how close they seem. Some truths are meant to protect you, not be shared. You won't want to miss that. Thank you for watching, and take care of your heart.